Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. And today, we're going to be diving deep into, well, beer. I mean, everyone knows beer, it's everywhere. But I don't think a lot of people realize, just how old beer is, how much history and science is really behind this stuff. We're not talking about just grabbing a six-pack from the store. We're talking about literally like thousands of years.
Absolutely. Like beer has been with us for like over 7,000 years, right? And I mean, think about it. That's like almost unfathomable. We have sources here, like archaeological evidence of these ancient brewing practices. We have like research on the actual science behind how beer is made. And we've even looked into like the global beer market, which by the way, is a huge business.
Yeah, I saw that. Like the global market is worth something crazy.
Yeah.
It's not just a fun drink. It's a huge industry.
Exactly. So we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, right? But like, I think what we want to do today is really get into like all the different aspects of beer, from those like very first brews to what's happening in the world of beer today.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Like you said, 7,000 years ago. Do we even know who the first people were who made beer?
Well, the earliest concrete evidence points to like the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. We're talking like 4000 BC. And what's interesting is like they had this goddess, Ninkasi, who was the goddess of beer. So it wasn't just a drink to them. It was like deeply ingrained in their culture, even their religion.
Wow, a beer goddess. That's pretty serious. So they were like worshiping beer.
It seems that way. And, there's this hymn to Ninkasi that basically reads like a recipe for beer. Like they're praising her while literally describing the brewing process.
That's so cool. So it was like sacred knowledge or something?
Yeah, I mean, it really shows you how important beer was to these early civilizations. And then you have the Egyptians, who are also big on beer. And they actually had these drawings and hieroglyphs that show, the different stages of brewing.
So like the Egyptians and the Sumerians, they had these pretty sophisticated brewing methods already, even back then.
Yeah. I mean, not like what we have today, of course. But, they were refining techniques, experimenting with different ingredients. And then fast forward a bit, you have the Romans who spread like beer brewing throughout Europe.
Right. But did the monks also like have a big part in beer history?
Oh, absolutely. So in the Middle Ages, especially like around the 8th or 9th century, you have these European monasteries where brewing became like a central activity.
Okay, yeah, so those monks were serious brewers, right?
Yeah, they were really dedicated to it. They saw it as like a way to sustain themselves and also like as a form of hospitality. They would, offer beer to travelers and pilgrims. And they were meticulous in documenting their methods and experimenting. They really helped refine brewing techniques. And, a lot of like classic styles that we know today actually have their roots in those monasteries.
Wow, so monks really shaped the world of beer as we know it. And now, all these centuries later, like we were talking about, it's this massive global industry, this huge market.
Absolutely. I mean, the scale is just incredible. But, before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's really worth taking a closer look at, like, the actual science of brewing, like what goes into making beer.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, I know the basics, but yeah, let's break it down. So first of all, what are the main ingredients?
Okay, so there are 4 essential ingredients in beer. First and foremost, you have water. Sounds obvious, right?
Right.
But it's really crucial because water makes up like 90% of the final product. And the type of water you use actually influences the taste. Like the mineral content and the pH level of the water can affect things like, how the hops interact and how the yeast ferments.
Huh. That's interesting. So like the water itself has a flavor.
Well, it can contribute to the overall taste. Like, for example, if you have hard water with a lot of minerals, it might lead to a more bitter or, a more robust beer. Whereas like soft water is often used for making lighter, more delicate beers.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Ah.
So what about the other ingredients?
All right. So next up, you have malted barley. And this is where the sugars come from that eventually get converted into alcohol.
So malt is like the sugar source.
Exactly. And malting is a process where you basically soak the barley grains, let them germinate, and then you dry them out. And this germination process activates enzymes in the barley that are going to like convert those starches into sugars.
Oh, okay. So that's how you get those sugars.
Yeah.
And then you have hops, right? And I mostly think of hops as making the beer bitter.
Yeah, hops definitely contribute to bitterness, but they do so much more than that. Hops also add aroma. They can give you like citrusy notes or floral notes or even like piney or earthy flavors.
Wow, so it's not just bitterness, it's like a whole range of flavors.
Exactly. And then they also act as a natural preservative, which was really important, back in the day before refrigeration.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then last but not least, we have yeast. And I guess that's what makes the magic happen, right?
Absolutely. Yeast is the real workhorse of brewing. They're these microscopic organisms that consume the sugars from the malted barley and produce alcohol and CO2 as byproducts. It's the fermentation process.
Wow, so tiny little creatures responsible for all the alcohol.
It's pretty amazing. And different strains of yeast can create like vastly different flavors. Some yeasts produce more fruity flavors while others are more, spicy or earthy.
But like the type of yeast you use has a big impact on the final product.
Huge impact. Yeah, and this is where brewers can really get creative. They can experiment with different yeast strains to like create all sorts of unique flavor profiles.
That's really cool. So we've got our 4 ingredients. So what actually happens during the brewing process? Like how does it all come together?
So, okay, here's a quick overview of like the basic steps involved in brewing. The first step is, like we said, malting the barley.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move on to mashing. And basically what you're doing here is you're mixing the crushed malted barley with hot water. And this activates those enzymes that break down the starches into sugars.
So that's when the sugar conversion happens.
Exactly. And what you get is this sugary liquid called wort.
Wort, okay.
And then you move on to boiling the wort. And during this stage, you add the hops. And the boiling also helps to sterilize the wort.
Okay, so boiling gets rid of any bacteria or anything that might be in there.
Exactly. And after boiling, the wort is cooled down. And then it's transferred to a fermentation vessel. And that's where the yeast is added.
So the yeast does its thing in the fermentation vessel.
Right. And this is where those sugars are converted into alcohol and CO2. And the fermentation process can take, anywhere from a few days to several weeks.
Wow, okay. So once the yeast is done, is the beer ready to go?
Almost. After fermentation, most beers go through conditioning process. And this is where the beer is like aged or matured. It allows the flavors to mellow out and develop.
So it's not just ferment and drink.
Not quite.
There's a little more to it.
Right. And then finally, once the beer is properly conditioned, it's packaged, into bottles, cans, kegs, and ready to be enjoyed.
Okay, so that's the whole process. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty amazing when you think about like all those steps involved. But what's really remarkable is that even though we've like broken it down into these distinct steps, brewing is still like a bit of an art form.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. So much can affect the final product, right?
Absolutely. I mean, everything from like the quality of the water to the types of hops to the yeast strain to even the temperature control during fermentation. All of these things can have a huge impact on like the taste, the aroma, the color, the mouthfeel of the final beer.
So a slight change in any one of those steps could like totally change the beer.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why brewing is like a blend of science and creativity.
That's super cool. Okay, so we've covered the brewing process, but now I'm kind of curious about all those different types of beers out there. Like you go to a bar or a brewery or even just the grocery store, and there are so many options.
It can be overwhelming, but like, don't worry, we can break it down. So generally speaking, beers can be categorized into like a few major families or styles based on like the ingredients, the brewing process, and the overall flavor profile.
Okay, families of beer, that's a good way to think about it. So what are some of these families?
Okay, so like one of the most fundamental distinctions is between lagers and ales. And this difference comes down to the type of yeast used and the fermentation temperature.
Right, we were talking about yeast earlier.
Right. So lagers are fermented at cooler temperatures, and they use a yeast that settles to the bottom of the fermentation tank.
Bottom fermenting, I've heard that term before.
Yeah, and lagers are typically known for their clean, crisp flavor. They're often light in color and pretty refreshing.
Okay, so like Pilsners would be an example of a lager, right?
Exactly. Pilsners are a classic example of a lager. And you also have like Helles lagers, which are German-style lagers, also very light and crisp. And then you have American lagers, which can be a little bit, a little bit sweeter and a little bit more full-bodied.
Okay, got it. So those are lagers. What about ales then?
So ales are fermented at warmer temperatures, and they use a yeast that tends to rise to the top during fermentation. And this is what gives ales their they're often more complex, more fruity, or sometimes even spicy flavors.
Okay, so ales are top fermenting and more complex.
Right. And there's a huge variety of ales out there. You have like pale ales, which are, well balanced, kind of hoppy, but not too bitter. And then you have IPAs, which are like the rock stars of the craft beer world.
IPAs and deep pale ales, right?
Yeah, and IPAs are known for their like intense hop aroma and bitterness.
Okay, those are definitely popular. And then what about like stouts and porters?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are like totally different from lagers and ales.
Right. So stouts and porters are a whole other family of beers. They're dark in color and they have these like rich roasted flavors that come from using roasted malts.
So it's the malt that gives them that dark color.
Exactly. And stouts are typically known for their coffee and chocolate notes, and they can be pretty dry or sometimes even a bit sweet.
Oh yeah, I love those coffee and chocolate notes in stouts. And what about porters? Are they similar?
Porters are similar to stouts in that they use roasted malts, but they tend to be a bit less intense, and sometimes they have more of a caramel or toffee flavor.
Okay, so stouts are more intense and porters are a bit more mellow.
Yeah, you could say that. And then we have sours and wild ales, and these are definitely a bit more adventurous.
Yeah, I've heard about those, but I haven't really tried many. What makes them so different?
So sours and wild ales are intentionally tart or sour, and that tartness comes from like the presence of lactic acid, which is produced by certain bacteria during fermentation.
Okay, so bacteria, not just yeast, is involved in these.
Exactly. And some sours and wild ales also use wild yeast strains that are like naturally present in the environment instead of, those carefully cultivated yeast strains that most brewers use.
So it's like letting nature do its thing.
Kind of. And these beers can be, they can be quite complex. They can be funky. They can be tart. They can be really refreshing.
Okay, so if you're looking for something a little bit outside the box, sours and wild ales might be a good option. And what about wheat beers? Those always look different, kind of cloudy.
Right. So wheat beers get their cloudy appearance from the use of wheat malt.
So not just barley, they use wheat too.
Exactly. And wheat beers are typically light-bodied and refreshing. And they often have like a slight citrusy flavor.
Oh yeah, I like those citrusy flavors.
And there are two main types of wheat beer that are pretty popular. German-style Hefeweizens, which are, they have these characteristic banana and clove flavors. And then Belgian wit beers, which are often flavored with coriander and orange peel.
Okay, so wheat beers, light and refreshing, often with citrus.
Yep. And of course, this is just like a really simplified overview of the major beer families.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's so many beers out there. This is probably just scratching the surface.
Exactly. But hopefully it gives you like a starting point for understanding, the basic differences between styles. And we haven't even gotten into all the sub-styles and, all the crazy experimental beers that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the craft beer movement, it feels like there are like new styles popping up all the time.
Absolutely. The craft beer scene has really exploded in recent years, and brewers are constantly pushing the boundaries, experimenting with different ingredients and techniques, and, creating all sorts of amazing and unique beers.
It's definitely an exciting time to be a beer drinker. Speaking of which, let's talk about, beer and health.
Ah, yes, the age-old question.
Right, because there's always that, that stereotype of the beer belly, and we all know that too much alcohol isn't good for you. But is there anything good about beer?
So, like with most things in life, moderation is key, right?
Yeah.
But there is some research suggesting that moderate beer consumption could actually have some potential health benefits.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for example, beer is a source of B vitamins, and it contains antioxidants.
Antioxidants, those are the things that fight free radicals, right?
Exactly. And some studies have suggested that moderate beer consumption could be linked to a lower risk of heart disease.
Interesting.
But it's important to emphasize that the key word here is moderate.
Right, because I was going to say, there are definitely risks associated with drinking too much.
Absolutely. I mean, excessive alcohol consumption can lead to all sorts of problems like liver damage, increased risk of certain cancers, and, it can be addictive. And of course, beer does have calories, so if you're drinking a lot of it, it can contribute to weight gain.
Right, and it's not like beer is a health food or anything.
No, definitely not.
It's more like if you're going to have a drink and you're doing it responsibly, beer might not be the worst choice.
Exactly. And I think it's important to, to listen to your body and to be aware of your own limits and to make informed choices about how much you're drinking.
Right. Always drink responsibly. Okay, so we've covered the history of beer, the science of brewing, the different styles, and the health aspects. But now let's talk about the business side of things. Because, like you said earlier, it's a massive global industry.
It is. I mean, we're talking about a market that's worth like hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's a constantly evolving landscape.
So what are some of the big trends happening in the beer world right now?
Well, one of the biggest trends is the rise of low alcohol and non-alcoholic beers.
Oh, yeah, I've noticed that. Like, there are so many more options now than there used to be.
Right. And it's not just like the big brands anymore. There are a lot of craft breweries that are, really putting out some high quality non-alcoholic beers.
Yeah, and they actually taste good.
Exactly. And I think it's a reflection of, changing consumer preferences. People are more health conscious these days, and they're looking for, alternatives that allow them to still enjoy the social aspect of drinking without necessarily, consuming a lot of alcohol.
Makes sense. What about sustainability? Because that's become a big thing in a lot of industries.
Yeah, sustainability is definitely a growing concern in the beer world. And a lot of breweries are taking steps to reduce their environmental impact.
Like how?
Well, for example, some breweries are using renewable energy sources like solar or wind power. Others are focusing on water conservation, reducing the amount of water they use in the brewing process. And some are even experimenting with, more sustainable packaging options, like using recycled materials or biodegradable packaging.
That's cool. So it sounds like the beer industry is trying to be more eco-friendly.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend that we're going to see continue to grow in the future. Consumers are definitely becoming more aware of, the environmental impact of the products they buy, and they're choosing to support brands that are, taking steps to be more sustainable.
Right. And what about technology? Is technology playing a role in the future of beer?
Oh, absolutely. Technology is already having a huge impact on the brewing industry, and we're only going to see more innovation in the years to come.
Like what kind of innovations?
Well, for example, some breweries are starting to use artificial intelligence to help them optimize their brewing processes.
AI for brewing beer, that's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So basically they're using AI to analyze data from, previous batches of beer and then use that data to make adjustments to their recipes or their processes to improve consistency and efficiency.
So they can fine-tune everything with the help of AI.
Exactly. And then you also have advancements in yeast cultivation. Like scientists are developing, new strains of yeast that can create, unique flavors or aromas, or even, yeasts that are more resistant to stress or contamination.
Wow. So the yeast itself is being engineered.
Right. And I think this is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much potential for technology to continue to shape the future of brewing.
That's really exciting. And speaking of the future, what do you think the future holds for beer in general?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but I think we can expect to see even more diversity in beer styles. I think craft brewers are going to continue to push the boundary.
Yeah, more crazy and experimental beers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're also going to see a continued focus on sustainability and on producing beers that are lower in alcohol or even non-alcoholic.
But more options for everyone.
Right. And who knows what other innovations are going to come along. I mean, maybe we'll even see, personalized beer where you can go to a brewery and they'll create a beer that's, tailored to your specific taste preferences.
Wow, that would be cool. So the future of beer is bright, but also kind of unpredictable.
Exactly. But I think one thing is for sure, beer is going to continue to be a beloved beverage for centuries to come.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. This has been an amazing deep dive into the world of beer. We've learned so much about its history, the science behind it, the different styles, and the trends shaping its future.
It's been a fascinating journey, and hopefully our listeners have a newfound appreciation for this amazing beverage.
Absolutely. So as we close out, I want to leave you with this thought. Knowing all that we've talked about today, the ancient origins, the brewing process, the sheer variety, the health considerations, the massive industry, the trends, and the innovations, how do you think beer will continue to evolve? And what role will it play in our lives, our cultures, and our world in the future? That's something to ponder over your next pint. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.